Has anyone ever told you you're a bit too good-looking to be climbing around in wires? The words dropped into the quiet kitchen like a wrench onto tile. Chandler Brooks froze with one hand still inside the light fixture, fingers brushing the warm casing of the new LED bulb. He blinked once, twice, then slowly looked over his shoulder. She stood there barefoot, leaning against the kitchen doorway. Eleanor Hart, 28. She wore a form-fitting dress, soft navy blue, hugging every subtle curve of her frame, hem stopping mid-thigh. It didn't scream for attention, it whispered it, effortlessly. Her posture was relaxed, one hip gently cocked, arms loosely crossed under her chest. Her eyes, steady and unreadable, rested on him with a quiet clarity. Her voice hadn't held flirtation. No drawl, no coyness, just observation. A statement, clean and unvarnished. Chandler straightened, cleared his throat. Thanks. He reached for the cloth on his belt and wiped his hands more than they needed wiping. I tightened the mount and swapped out the wiring with a safer neutral loop. Shouldn't flicker again. Eleanor nodded. She didn't move, didn't smile, just stood there like she was waiting for something else to settle. Outside, the late morning sun pressed against the wide window panes of her Buckhead kitchen. It was the kind of house Chandler never lingered in. High ceilings, countertops cool as marble, and the faint scent of rosemary and old books. A silence that felt curated. You always explain things like that? She asked, stepping further into the room. He glanced at her, caught off guard. Like what? Like the light is part of someone's story. Calm, precise, like it matters. Chandler set down his tools, heart beating in places he hadn't noticed in years. I guess when it's someone else's home, I try to make sure it stays theirs. That made her smile soft, almost invisible, but it changed the air. She moved toward the table, sat, then looked back up at him. You hungry? He stared for a beat. Pardon? Lunch. There's a deli 2 blocks down. Their turkey club is sinful. My treat. Chandler shifted on his feet. Everything inside him, his upbringing, his code, the dusty warnings of his late mother told him to say no. Never blur lines with clients. Never walk past the porch unless the job needed it. Especially not in a house like this, with a woman like her. But she didn't plead. She didn't push. She just asked. He smiled awkwardly. I've got another appointment soon. Liar, she said, still smiling but not cruelly. He chuckled despite himself. Half lie. It can wait. Eleanor leaned back, crossing one leg over the other slowly. Another time then? Maybe. As he packed up his kit, she stood and walked him to the door. He expected a quick goodbye, but she offered her hand. Thanks for fixing the flicker, Chandler. He shook it. Her palm was warm, grip firm. Not the limp, polished handshake of someone raised on trust funds and catered galas. It felt honest, like hers. He stepped outside into the heat of the Atlanta sun. The screen door clicked behind him. His truck waited at the curb, old paint, one cracked headlight, and a hard-working engine that coughed to life like it needed coffee. As he pulled away, he glanced into the rearview mirror. She wasn't there, but her name echoed in his mind. Eleanor. At his next Joba bungalow with sagging gutters and a corroded fuse box, he should have been focused. But even as he checked voltage levels, he replayed her words. Has anyone ever told you? And she hadn't said it like she was handing out candy. Later that night, Chandler sat on the worn leather couch of his modest apartment over the old barber shop on Lenox Road. The fan hummed low overhead, scattering the heat but not the restlessness. He picked up his phone. A message notification blinked. Eleanor Hart. In case you change your mind about that turkey club. He didn't open it. Not yet. He set the phone down, looked at his hand scallowed, steady, marked by years of copper wires and busted wall panels. Maybe it was just lunch. But Chandler Brooks had never been the kind of man who confused kindness with anything more. Still, as he lay back and stared at the ceiling, the flicker was no longer in the light. It was in him. The following morning started the same as any other for Chandler Brooks. Stools packed, boots laced, truck engine growling under the late spring haze. But nothing felt the same. His body moved on instinct, but his mind stayed in that kitchen, stayed with her. The softness in Eleanor's voice haunted him not because of how she said it, but because it had felt like truth. Not temptation, not a trap, just truth. He parked outside a duplex on Edgewood Avenue where a blown circuit had knocked out half the appliances. As he tested voltages and replaced a charred panel, his phone buzzed in his back pocket. He ignored it, finished the job. Then, while filling out the invoice on his clipboard, he checked the message. Eleanor Hart. Still craving that turkey club. Still offering. I'll even throw in a slice of lemon pea if you think you can handle that much sweetness. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. The street sounds around him, the whine of a weed trimmer. The hum of distant traffic seemed far away. He didn't respond. Not yet. But the message sat there, steady as her voice had been. By Thursday, he was back in Buckhead, different house, similar layout, same polished granite under his boots. As he rewired a stubborn breaker, he thought of her again. The dress, the tone, the invitation that hadn't felt like bait. He didn't notice the decision until it was already made. That evening, just after 6, he stood in front of a small brick deli tucked behind a row of elm trees. A bell above the door jingled when he stepped in. The place was cozy polished wood booths, a chalkboard menu overhead, the scent of smoked meat and garlic butter in the air. He wasn't surprised when he saw her already seated near the window, legs crossed, barefoot again, this time in a long cotton dress, loose and simple, hair pinned up casually. You showed, she said, setting down a glass of iced tea. Was starting to think I hallucinated that entire conversation. I was in the neighborhood, Chandler muttered, only half lying. Right, she smirked. In your work boots. He looked down at his boots. They were dusted and scuffed, but clean. Didn't think to bring date shoes. She tilted her head. Is this a date? Chandler paused. Is it supposed to be? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid a plate across the table. The sandwich was thick smoked turkey, cranberry aioli, sharp cheddar, toasted sourdough cut in half and still warm. Try it first, she said. Then decide. He took a bite. It was, objectively, perfect. He chewed, nodded, swallowed. All right, you win. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The kind of silence that let the clinking of glasses and the murmur of other diners do the talking. She sipped her tea. He took his time with the sandwich, hands steady but slower than usual. Finally, Eleanor leaned her elbows on the table and said, You always this cautious? Chandler wiped his mouth, met her gaze. You always this forward? She smiled. Only when I'm curious. About? Why a man who works with his hands like they're weapons still talks like he's reading poetry. He didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing. But something shifted in his chest. Something that hadn't stirred in years. After dinner, they stepped outside. The sun was low, bleeding orange through the clouds. Eleanor walked ahead barefoot, holding her heels in one hand. You always walk around like that? He asked. Only when I need to remember where I am. Chandler glanced down at the sidewalk, then at her feet brushing against the concrete. Seems like it had hurt. Sometimes, she said, but that's part of feeling alive. He didn't respond, but the image stayed with him. They reached her Cara silver Audi tucked under a street lamp. She turned to him, resting a hand on the driver's door. So, turkey club verdict? Dangerous, he said. To your health? To my habits. She nodded once slowly. I won't press, but I'll leave the window open. He gave her a short smile. Just watch your feet. You might step on something real. She laughed, soft and sudden, and it stuck in the air even after the door shut behind her. Chandler watched her drive off. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, the last warmth of sunlight brushing across his shoulders. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, staring at her message from earlier. His thumb hovered, hesitated. Then he typed, Next time, I bring the sandwich. He hit send before he could think twice. Friday rolled in quiet and gray. He spent the day rewiring a ranch-style home south of the city, but the hours felt shorter somehow. At 5:37 p.m., another message came through. Eleanor Hart, Saturday, noon. Meet me at the hardware store on 4th. I've got a project that needs both hands. He read it twice. The next morning, Chandler showed up in a fresh button-down and clean jeans. Not fancy, just presentable. The store was quiet aisles lined with bolts and wire spools, the air tinged with sawdust and machine oil. She was waiting near the front, holding a paper bag and wearing that same easy confidence, hair pulled back in a simple knot. "You really came," she said. "You really asked." She handed him the bag. Ham and Swiss this time. And yes, I remembered the mustard. He took the bag, but his eyes stayed on her. "What are we fixing?" She smiled, turned toward the exit. "You'll see." And without another word, she walked ahead barefoot, again into the warm light of a day neither of them fully understood yet. Chandler followed, unaware that in the next hour, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing more than a sandwich and silence between them, something fragile and unexpected would begin to root beneath the surface. Not loud, not sudden, but real. The gravel crunched beneath Chandler's boots as he stepped out of Eleanor's car. They had driven 20 minutes out of the city, past red brick storefronts and clusters of old churches, into the kind of country where mailboxes leaned and tree lines whispered. She parked the car beneath a canopy of pines, turned off the engine, and opened her door without a word. He followed. Ahead, a small clearing opened beside a winding stretch of river. A faded picnic table stood under an ancient oak, its bark gray and splitting with age. The sunlight filtered through the leaves in lazy streaks, dappling the ground. Eleanor walked ahead of him, barefoot as always, the hem of her cotton dress catching in the breeze. In one hand, she carried the paper bag of sandwiches. In the other, nothing but a kind of peace Chandler hadn't seen on anyone in years. They sat in silence, unwrapped the sandwiches, chewed. Ham and Swiss, like she promised, toasted just right. He didn't compliment it. She didn't ask for it. It was the kind of meal that didn't need to impress, only fill. After a long while, Eleanor spoke without looking at him. "Do you think I'm strange?" Chandler swallowed his bite and wiped his fingers on the napkin. "Number. You don't even know what I mean yet. You drove me to the woods, fed me a sandwich, and haven't asked me a single personal question," he said, glancing sideways. "Honestly, it's the most normal date I've had in a while." She snorted. "You think this is a date? You wearing perfume?" She smirked. "Maybe. Then yeah, it counts." She laughed, low and short, then looked out at the river again. "I used to come here as a kid, before my mom passed. My grandmother would bring me after Sunday school. Said the water could wash away whatever the week put on your shoulders." "Smart woman." "She was," Eleanor said softly. "She raised me more than my father ever did." He didn't ask for more, just nodded, watching the sunlight shift across the river. A breeze picked up, rustling the oak branches overhead. Eleanor leaned back on her palms, tilted her face to the sky, and closed her eyes. Chandler studied her, really studied her. Not like a man does when he's trying to decide what to want, but the way someone looks at a painting in a museum and realizes it says something they've never been able to put into words. "You know what I like about you?" she asked suddenly. "I'm good with wires. You don't ask about my house, or what I do, or how much the car costs. You don't seem impressed. I was taught not to stare at things that didn't belong to me." She opened her eyes and looked straight at him. "And what if it does?" He didn't answer. Not because he didn't have a thought, but because the question wasn't really about the house or the car. It was about worth, belonging, being seen, not measured. The wind shifted again, and with it came the sudden cool of shade. "I should go," Chandler said, voice low. Eleanor didn't move. "Will you?" He stood slowly, brushing crumbs from his jeans. "Not if you ask me to stay." She looked up at him, calm, sure, without a trace of uncertainty. "Then stay." So he did. They stayed under the tree until the shadows stretched long and the river quieted. They didn't talk about work, or race, or the city waiting for them beyond the trees. They talked about childhood scars, about the worst dates they'd ever had, about how Chandler once spent 3 hours trapped in a crawl space with a raccoon staring him down from 6 feet away. She laughed so hard she choked on a bite of pickle. They sat close but didn't touch. Their arms never brushed. No stolen kisses, no searching glances. Just presence. Two people on the same bench, not trying to escape it. When the sun dipped low enough to paint the sky in lavender, Eleanor finally said, "Most people don't stay this long." Chandler looked at her, quiet for a beat. Most people aren't invited. As they walked back to the car, she slipped her sandals back on. For the first time, she looked unsure. Not afraid, just human. Back in the passenger seat, Chandler stared out the window as she drove. The wind curled through the cracked window, soft and warm. He thought of how different this moment was from the last time he'd been in her car. Back then, she had been a question mark. Now, she was a full sentence. At the edge of the city, she turned to him at a red light. "I'm having dinner at my place tomorrow night. Nothing fancy." He hesitated. "Should I bring tools or wine?" Eleanor smiled. "Just yourself. And maybe don't wear the boots." "Too late," he said, nodding to his feet. "They're permanent." She looked at him like he had said something far deeper than he meant. "That's okay. I don't scare easy." He didn't say anything else the rest of the drive. When she pulled up in front of his building, he didn't get out right away. She didn't rush him. "Thanks for today," he said. "Thanks for showing up." He climbed out, closed the door gently, and watched her taillights fade into the city. Later that night, lying on the same couch he always did, with the fan rattling in the background and the hum of the barbershop downstairs finally gone, Chandler stared at his phone. No new message. No need. She had already said enough. And so had he. The knock at Eleanor's front door came exactly at 6:59 p.m. She opened it to find Chandler standing there, brown paper bag in one hand, dressed in a clean gray button-up and dark jeans. His boots were, as promised, still on. "Told you they're permanent," he said, lifting the bag. She stepped aside to let him in. "That's the most southern entrance I've ever seen. Cornbread and boots. You invited both." The smell of roasted rosemary and garlic filled the air. Soft R&B played in the background, barely above a whisper. Candles flickered on the kitchen island where 2 plates were already set. Eleanor wore a loose cardigan and black leggings. Her hair pulled up in a way that looked effortless but wasn't. No makeup, no diamonds, just her. "You made all this?" Chandler asked, eyeing the tray of salmon, roasted vegetables, and a dish that looked suspiciously like something with goat cheese. "I assemble," she said. "I don't cook, but I follow instructions really well." He set the bag on the counter and pulled out the foil-wrapped cornbread. "It's from the market on Ashford. Don't judge. I warmed it." Eleanor smiled. "Already smells like home." Oh. They sat across from each other at the island, their movements quiet, unforced. Chandler's hands were still a little rough from rewiring a breaker earlier that day. Eleanor noticed the small scrape near his knuckle but didn't mention it. He noticed how her eyes lit up every time she spoke about the books stacked beside the pantry. Dinner moved slow. They talked about everything and nothing. Eleanor told him about a poetry reading she once hosted where the author forgot their own work and cried mid-stanza. Chandler shared a story about a client who tried to pay him in vintage gum wrappers. She laughed with her whole face eyes squinting, mouth open, head tilted back. It wasn't elegant. It was honest. At one point, she leaned forward, chin resting on her palm, and said, "You have a quiet way of being loud." Chandler raised a brow. "That a compliment?" "It is. You don't force presence. You just have it." He didn't know how to respond, so he reached for more cornbread instead. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Eleanor curled into the corner of the couch, her legs tucked under her. Chandler sat at the other end, hands folded in his lap. There was more space between them than the couch required. "You don't have to sit like you're waiting for a bus," she said. "I wasn't raised to slouch in a woman's house." She rolled her eyes. "You're allowed to relax, especially here." He hesitated, then slowly leaned back, one arm resting on the cushion behind him. "That's better," she said. "Now you look like someone I actually invited." A moment passed, soft and weightless. Then Eleanor looked toward the window, the city lights flickering through the blinds. "You ever wonder what people say about us?" she asked. Chandler turned his head slightly. "Us?" "You, me, this," she said, gesturing vaguely around the room. He exhaled through his nose. "Probably a lot. Probably none of it good." She nodded, her tone quiet. "My world is loud, not just in sound, but in expectations. You don't just walk through it unnoticed." "I don't aim to," Chandler said, "but I also don't ask for permission." She looked at him then, steady and unmoving. "That's what scares them. What about you?" "I don't scare easy." They sat there in silence, the kind that hummed with meaning, not discomfort, something else, like 2 wires hovering just close enough to spark. Later, as he stood at the door, preparing to leave, Eleanor followed him out to the porch. The night air was cool, gentle. The neighborhood was quiet, in the way rich neighborhoods are peaceful, but not always welcoming. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Thanks for the food. And the honesty." She looked at him for a moment, then added, "You still owe me a sandwich." He glanced over his shoulder. "Next time, I'll even toast it." "Ah." She smiled, soft and certain. "Good." Then she closed the door slowly behind him. The next morning, Chandler sat in the corner booth of a small diner 2 blocks from his apartment. A waitress named Millie topped off his coffee while the local radio played jazz through the speakers. He scrolled through his messages, half hoping, half dreading. There it was, a photo from Eleanor, a blurry drawing of a sandwich in crayon-thick meat, bread, cheese, stick figures pointing at it like it was sacred. Caption, "Visual inspiration, get it right." He laughed quietly, shook his head. Then 2 men in the booth behind him muttered just loud enough for it not to be accidental. "Isn't that the guy with the rich white girl from Instagram?" "Yeah, probably her project. Charity case in work boots." Chandler didn't turn around, didn't flinch, but he felt it. The shift, the invisible line people like them always drew when things got too real. He set the phone down, pushed the coffee cup aside, and stared out the window for a long moment. And just like that, something tightened in his chest. Not fear, not doubt, just a familiar question rising again, one he hadn't asked in years. How long could something good survive in a world that only pretended to be fair? He didn't have the answer yet, but he knew this much. He wasn't walking away. Not now. Not yet. Monday came early, loud and unrelenting. Chandler was back on job calls before sunrise, working a circuit panel in Decatur that sparked every time the dryer kicked on. He didn't mind the noise, or the crawling under houses, or the smell of rusted copper and insulation. What he minded, what lingered, was that diner. He hadn't told Eleanor about the comments. Not yet. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe he didn't know how. But every time her name lit up on his phone, the words those men said curled like smoke in the back of his throat. By Tuesday, the smoke became something else. He was in the middle of rewiring a small church off Candler Road when his boss pulled up in a white service van, face drawn, clipboard in hand. "Simon's estate just pulled their contract," the man said without preamble. Chandler blinked, standing on the front steps of the chapel, dust on his shirt. "What? I haven't been on that site in weeks. They said it's about public image. Mentioned something they saw online. Pictures. Pictures." Chandler's mouth dreed. "You do something I should know about?" his boss asked, more concerned than accusatory. "No," Chandler said. "I've only done my job." His boss studied him a second longer, then gave a tight nod. "Let's keep it that way." That night, Chandler sat in his truck in the parking lot of his apartment building, hands still gripping the wheel even after he'd killed the engine. The dashboard clock blinked 9:18 p.m. His phone rested on the passenger seat. He didn't pick it up, didn't call her, didn't text. And for a man who'd always prided himself on control, the silence felt like it was eating him from the inside out. Wednesday evening, the phone rang. He didn't answer on the first try, but Eleanor didn't leave a voicemail. She called again. This time, he picked up. "You free?" she asked, her voice low but warm. "Define free." "I'm sitting on my front steps with 2 milkshakes and no one to share them with." Chandler paused. "You bought 2 on purpose, didn't you?" "No comment. Come over." He drove with the windows down. Atlanta air was heavy that night, humid and thick with early summer. Her street was quiet when he pulled up, the porch light on like a signal. She sat on the top step in joggers and a worn hoodie, hair in a loose bun, sipping from a paper cup topped with whipped cream. She held the other one out to him as he approached. "Chocolate peanut butter. Figured you for a classic." He took it, Saturday beside her, said nothing. They drank in silence for a while, letting the trees rustle around them. Then Eleanor shifted. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Did someone say something to you?" Chandler's grip tightened slightly on the cup. "Why?" "Because something's shifted. You're here, but not all of you." He hesitated, staring at the cup lid. "At a diner. 2 guys said some things. About you. About me. Called me your project." Eleanor exhaled long, slow. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize for what other people say. I do when they say it because of me. He turned to her. It's not your fault I don't fit in their world. You fit in mine, she said, voice clear and still. And that's the only world I care about. A long pause. I lost a client, Chandler said. The Simons estate. After that photo of us at the park showed up online. Eleanor stiffened. What photo? Someone must have snapped one. It's making the rounds, I guess. Damn it, she muttered, standing up and pacing a few steps. I'm so tired of this. Tired of what? Of people assuming they get to decide what's acceptable. Who I can be seen with. Who you get to be. It's exhausting. Chandler stood slowly. Then maybe we take a break. The words hung in the air like a storm. Eleanor turned, her expression unreadable. What? Not from you, he clarified. Just from the noise, from the glare. You think that'll help? I think if I don't breathe, I'll drown. She didn't argue, but her eyes, they didn't plead. They just hurt. Okay, she said softly, if that's what you need. It's not forever. I know. There was nothing more to say, but before he stepped off the porch, she placed a hand gently on his chest. You're not a project, Chandler Brooks. I know. You're not small. You're not temporary. You're not a symbol or a rebellion or a mistake. He looked at her, eyes heavier than usual. Then why does it feel like I'm always fighting to prove that? She didn't answer with words, just rested her forehead against his, and they stood there like that, breathing the same air, until neither of them could remember what came next. When he left, the porch light stayed on longer than usual, and Chandler knew the real battle hadn't even begun. The week rolled by with a strange silence humming between them. Chandler buried himself in work, even as jobs thinned out some canceled last minute. Others mysteriously postponed. Each time he showed up with his tools and blue work shirt, the world felt a little colder, a little smaller. He didn't blame Eleanor, but he couldn't forget the look in her eyes when he'd said they needed space. Not rejection, not even disappointment, just sadness. The kind of sadness that wraps itself around your ribs and settles into your breath. On Saturday morning, a note was taped to his door. It wasn't from a neighbor. It wasn't from work. The handwriting was clean, deliberate. It read, "There's something in my house that needs fixing. And no, it's not the wiring." Below it, an address. Her address. Chandler stood at his door for a full minute, the paper soft in his fingers. The sun was rising slow through the blinds, casting long shadows across the kitchen tile. He hadn't spoken to her since Tuesday. Hadn't called. Hadn't driven past her street. But now, here she was offering something. Was it peace? A puzzle? A trap? He folded the note, grabbed his tool bag, and left. Eleanor's house looked the same as always: white columns, brick porch, ivy creeping along the edges. But when she opened the door, her expression wasn't quite the same. She wore a soft blue blouse tucked into jeans, barefoot, hair brushed straight behind her ears. But her posture was lighter, calmer. "I thought I told you to give me space," Chandler said, half a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "And I thought I said there was something broken inside." "What is it?" he asked. She stepped back, letting him in. "Follow me." They walked past the kitchen, into a quiet room with cream walls and a baby grand piano resting against the far corner. The lid was open. On the music rack, there was a letter, thick cream paper, sealed with wax. "It came yesterday," she said. "No return address, but it's about you." Chandler furrowed his brow. He stepped closer, gently picked it up, and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet. "Miss Hart, I'm writing not out of malice but out of concern. You should be careful who you let into your life, especially men like that. You may not realize it, but people notice, and people talk. You're a woman of means and reputation. He is not. That kind of pairing, well, let's just say it doesn't go unnoticed. For your sake, and the sake of your late father's name, I suggest caution. Respectfully, a friend." Chandler's hands curled into fists before he even finished the last word. His jaw locked tight. Eleanor watched his reaction but didn't interrupt. After a long pause, she said quietly, "This is why I sent you the note." He looked up. "You wanted me to see this? I wanted you to know what I'm up against, and what we're up against if this means anything to you." He stared at the paper again, then let it drift down onto the piano lid like it was too heavy to hold. "Does it scare you?" he asked. "No," she said. "It angers me." "Do you know who sent it?" "Number, but it doesn't matter." He turned away, breathing slow. "Yes, it does, because that person thinks they know me, thinks they can reduce me to what I look like, what I wear, what I earn, and they're wrong. They are, and yet they're not alone." He faced her again. This time, not angry but weary. "I'm not ashamed of who I am. But sometimes, Eleanor, I'm tired of being a statement." She walked closer, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't be. Let's not let them decide the meaning of what this is." "This?" he asked. "You, me, us, whatever you want to call it." Chandler exhaled through his nose, long and deep. He took her hand. "What if it gets worse? Then we let it. Together." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her soft. Careful, not the kind of kiss that needed to prove anything. Just enough. When they pulled back, Eleanor smiled. "The wiring was just an excuse, by the way." "I know," he said, "but I brought tools anyway." Later, as the afternoon faded into gold, they sat on her back porch with glasses of lemonade. Eleanor rested her legs over his lap, and Chandler tuned out the world. "I was thinking," she said, "about what you said earlier, about being a statement." "Yeah? What if we turned that around? Made it about presence instead of resistance?" "Explain." Well," she said, swirling her straw, "what if our being together wasn't about defying expectations, but about showing up, honestly, consistently, not louder, just real?" Chandler was quiet a moment. Then, "You're smarter than you look." "I get that a lot." He chuckled. "And you look like trouble." "I get that even more." They laughed, and for the first time in days, it wasn't forced. But neither of them saw the black sedan parked 2 houses down, windows tinted, engine silent, and inside, a phone clicked, once, then again, because while they were reclaiming truth, someone else was building a lie. And the photo this time wouldn't stay quiet. It began with silence, not the peaceful kind that wrapped a home in morning light, but the eerie stillness that hovered before a storm charged, waiting, listening. The black sedan was gone by sunrise, but something lingered. Eleanor couldn't explain it, not even to herself, but when she pulled open the curtains that morning, a chill brushed her neck like breath. Chandler wasn't due until noon. He was finishing a job across town, something about rewiring a porch fan for an elderly couple in Dilworth. But Eleanor didn't wait for him to call. Instead, she opened her email and froze. An anonymous message had arrived at 3:12 a.m. Subject: "Still think he's just here for the wiring?" Attachment: Photo 001. JPG. The file loaded slowly then all at once. A zoomed-in image. Chandler on her back porch, his hand resting on her thigh, her head tilted back mid-laugh. It was intimate, soft, real. The angliate was taken from outside the fence. A long lens. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mouth tasted like metal. She scrolled down. No text, no name, no signature. Just a second photo. This one was older. Chandler in his work truck, parked near a woman's home in Charlotte's West Side. The timestamp was last year. Eleanor recognized the house it had once belonged to her late father's attorney. What the hell was this? She closed the laptop with trembling fingers. At 12:04 p.m., Chandler pulled into the driveway, his truck rattling with age and pride. He climbed out with a bag of groceries and a crooked grin. "Thought I'd cook for you. Hope you like red beans and rice." But when he saw her face, his smile dropped like a stone. "What happened?" he asked. Eleanor opened the door wider. Inside, in the kitchen, she showed him the photos. At first, he didn't speak. His eyes flicked from one image to the next. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched near his temple. When he finally set the laptop down, his voice came out low. "Where did you get these?" "Email. No sender name. Just time-stamped. Someone's following you. Or us." "Yeah," he muttered, turning away. "That tracks." What do you mean?" "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to drag this into your world. But this isn't the first time." He paced the kitchen, knuckles white around his phone. "Last month, I noticed someone parked outside my place a few nights in a row. Same car, same plates. I chalked it up to paranoia. You think this is connected? I don't know what to think, Eleanor. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his back. Tell me what's going on. He sighed, long and bitter. You remember the job I did in Briar Hollow last year? That woman Ruth Maxwell? The city attorney? He nodded. Her brother got caught in a lawsuit. Something big. Zoning fraud. Backdoor deals with developers. I was just the guy fixing a broken light, but I overheard something. I didn't even mean toy, just listened. Eleanor's eyes widened. You testified? Anonymous tip. I thought that was the end of it. But maybe someone found out. Maybe they think I'm a risk. She stared at him, the pieces clicking together in her mind. This isn't about us, Chandler. It's about leverage. That's what scares me. They stood in silence, her hand still resting gently on his back, his eyes staring at nothing. Then she said, We need help. From who? There's someone my father trusted. Retired now, but sharp. His name's Walter Kane. Used to be with the Department of Justice. He lives near Lake Norman. He might still take my call. Chandler gave her a long look. Are you sure? Number, but I'm sure we can't wait for this to go away. They drove upstate that evening, the roads twisting through green hills and suburban sprawl. Walter's house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, shaded by massive oaks. When he opened the door, he looked exactly as Eleanor remembered. Gray hair, square jaw, eyes like cold steel and warm whiskey. You always had your mother's sense, he said with a tight smile. Come in. They explained everything. Emails, photos, the zoning case, Chandler's anonymous tip, and now this shadow following their steps. Walter listened without interruption, tapping one weathered finger against the rim of his coffee cup. When they finished, he leaned back and said simply, You've kicked a nest you didn't know existed. Chandler frowned. What kind of nest? Old money, dirty money, developers, judges, city contracts, and people who like their secrets to stay buried. Eleanor asked, why target Chandler now? Because you matter. Your name opens doors. And him? He's inconvenient. A witness, a variable, and someone they think they can scare. But they haven't made any demands, she said. Not yet. This, he gestured to the photos, is just pressure. They want you nervous, isolated, willing to fold before it escalates. Chandler leaned forward. What do we do? Walter's eyes narrowed. You document everything. You don't go anywhere alone. And you find the weak thread in their web because even the most powerful men panic when their secrets tremble. Eleanor nodded. We'll start with the city attorney's brother. Walter smiled grimly. Good. Just remember when you get close, they won't play nice. That night, as they drove back under a moonless sky, Eleanor whispered, Are you scared? Chandler didn't answer right away. He stared out the window past trees and headlights. Then softly, Yeah, but I'm more tired of running than I am of fear. She reached over, her fingers lacing with his, and between them, a vow was born not of romance, but of resolve. They would not be quiet. Not anymore. It started with a knock. Not loud, not frantic. Just 3 solid raps on the front door that echoed like a memory. Eleanor opened it to find a man in a navy windbreaker standing on the porch, holding a clipboard. His build was stocky, face ruddy from the sun, and a polite smile rested on his lips, but his eyes were scanning, calculating. Eleanor Hart? He asked, flipping a badge open. Detective Ray Morrison, Mecklenburg County. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Chandler, who had been at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes, stepped out quietly. Eleanor glanced at him, then back to the detective. About what? There's been a string of unauthorized surveillance incidents in the area, hidden cameras, drones, wiretaps. We received a tip that your property might be involved. Involved how? Victimized. We'd like permission to do a walkthrough. Just exterior and tech sweeps. Eleanor hesitated. Chandler stepped in. You got a warrant? Morrison raised a brow. Not at this moment. Just a courtesy check. You can refuse. Eleanor studied him for a moment. His smile didn't shift, but something about him felt too smooth. We'll consider it. Can we contact you if we decide to move forward? Of course. He handed over a card. Have a good day, ma'am. As soon as the door clicked shut, Chandler exhaled through his nose. That's not just a detective. Number. Eleanor tapped the card on her palm. And I don't think he's here to help. They sat at the dining table, surrounded by uneaten toast and cold coffee. Eleanor pulled out her laptop, typing in the badge number Morrison had flashed. 10 minutes of digging confirmed her gut. No such detective existed in Mecklenburg County. Whoever he was, he had clearance to fake credentials well enough to fool most people. But not them. Not anymore. We're getting too close, Chandler murmured. They're rattling the doorknob. Then let's kick it open, Eleanor said, a steel edge in her voice. Walter was right, we need to find the weak link. That night, Chandler reached out to an old contact, Deja Morris, a freelance journalist with a reputation for digging into city corruption. They met her in a diner off South Boulevard, its neon flickering against the windows like something from another decade. Deja was in her mid-40s, sharp-witted and faster with a recorder than most were with a pistol. She slid into the booth and eyed them both. You sure you want to do this? Once I dig, I don't stop. We're sure, Chandler said. We think it traces back to Charles Maxwell's city attorney's brother. Maxwell, she repeated, nodding. Big name. Bad smell. He's got real estate hands in half of uptown Charlotte. Eleanor leaned forward. We think he's orchestrating harassment to cover past zoning, fraud, and eliminate anyone who knows. Deja raised an eyebrow. That includes you? Indirectly. Chandler gave a tip a year ago. Now we've got surveillance, fake cops, and intimidation tactics. Deja clicked her pen. Send me what you've got. Emails, photos, timestamps. I'll start cross-referencing his building permits, city council connections, and campaign donations. If there's a thread, I'll find it. The meeting ended with a shared glance of resolve. Deja slid them a burner phone. Keep this on. If I vanish, call Walter and get the hell out. By the time they returned home, the air had thickened. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced the living room while Chandler sat at the kitchen island, sharpening a small pocket knife not for use, but for focus. He wasn't afraid of violence. He was afraid of silence, of secrets swallowing truth. Eleanor stared at a photo of her father on the wall. He had always been stern, conservative, but fair. A retired federal judge who believed the law was more sacred than blood. She whispered under her breath, "What would you have done, Dad?" The next day, Deja called. I found something. A zoning override stamped by Charles Maxwell's office last spring. The permit was for a building project that should have been denied. Environmental code violations, local protests. But someone fast-tracked it. Chandler asked, "Where's the building?" Edge of Noda. It's still under construction. Want to take a walk? They met near the Cytean, empty lot fenced off with temporary panels. Yellow tape waved in the wind like surrender flags. A half-finished apartment complex sat crooked, abandoned mid-project. The city seal had been painted over, and all company signs removed. This was a slum clearance zone, Deja explained. The residents were paid off or pushed out, and guess who bought the land 6 weeks later? Maxwell, Eleanor guessed. Deja nodded. Under a shell company, Whitewood Holdings, LLC. Guess who's on the board? 2 city council members, 1 judge, and a former police chief. Jesus, Chandler muttered. They're building a fortress out of public trust. Eleanor snapped photos on her phone. Every angle, every crack. She felt like she was documenting a crime scene no one else would ever admit existed. That evening, Eleanor's inbox pinged again. Another anonymous email. Subject: Your friend talks too much. Attachment: Audio 001, MP3. She clicked play. It was Deja speaking into her recorder. If this goes public, they'll bury me. But someone has to say it. Maxwell's entire empire is built on silence. And then, another voicemail. Threatening. Then maybe silence is what you'll get. Eleanor's blood went cold. She played it for Chandler. His face went still, then dark. We have to warn her. But Deja wasn't picking up. They tried Walter. No answer. The burner phone chirped with a text from Deja's number. Meet me at the bridge. Come alone. No punctuation. No warmth. Not like her. Eleanor stared at it, dread blooming in her chest. Chandler grabbed his jacket. You're not going alone. If this is a trap, they picked the wrong night. As they left the house, Eleanor whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. Please don't let this be the end of her. And somewhere, beneath the hum of streetlights and the rustle of the night breeze, something ancient stirred danger, yes, but also defiance. They weren't running anymore. They were marching toward the fire. The night air had that tight stillness like the pause before a thunderstorm. Eleanor gripped the wheel, her knuckles pale as she steered the car through the winding road toward the bridge just outside uptown Charlotte. Chandler sat in the passenger seat, staring ahead in silence, but every muscle in his jaw was tight. The burner phone sat between them on the console, its screen still glowing with the last message from Deja. Meet me at the bridge. Come alone. But they weren't alone. Not this time. The bridge came into view, an old, narrow overpass that spanned a disused freight line. Below it, rusted rails twisted through shadows and weeds. No cars, no people. Just a street lamp at the edge casting a cone of light over the pavement like a stage waiting for its actors. Eleanor slowed the car and pulled to the side. They sat in the quiet for a few long seconds. Then Chandler opened the glove compartment and pulled out a small flashlight and a folded utility knife. Stay behind me. Always, he said softly. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. They stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath their shoes, and approached the bridge on foot. The wind was picking up, now pushing Eleanor's coat back and carrying the scent of damp steel and pine. Deja? Chandler called out, voice steady. No response. But then, from beneath the bridge, a rustling. Eleanor moved closer to Chandler. That's her coat, she whispered. A dark figure was slumped beside a concrete column, and a familiar tan trench coat was just barely visible beneath the dim light. They ran to her. Deja was breathing but barely. Her eyes fluttered open as they knelt beside her. Told you, she rasped. Didn't listen, huh? Chandler gripped her hand. What happened? 2 men. Black SUV. Same guys that tried to tail me last month. They found the burner. Said you were getting too loud. One of them was a cop, or dressed like one. Eleanor pulled out her phone to call an ambulance, but Deja weakly shook her head. Don't. They'll trace it. Just get the audio file to Walter. He'll know what to do. Her eyes closed again, and Eleanor felt panic rise in her chest, but Chandler leaned down and listened to her breathing. She's still with us, he said, but we need to Mava now. They got Deja into the backseat of the car, covering her with a jacket, and Chandler drove like a man with nothing left to lose. As they pulled onto the interstate, Eleanor finally broke the silence. They don't want justice. They want silence, and they're willing to kill for it. Chandler kept his eyes on the road. Then let's make some noise. They didn't go home. They drove straight to Walter Shaw's farmhouse on the outskirts of Concord. The lights were on, and Walter, dressed in flannel and jeans, opened the door with a rifle in his hands. When he saw Deja, his expression changed. Help me bring her in, he said. Inside, Walter cleared off the dining table, and with military precision, helped stabilize her. She's tough, he muttered, tying off a makeshift bandage. But we can't take her to the hospital, not yet. Eleanor pulled out her phone and handed it to Walter. There's an audio file. She said you'd know what to do with it. Walter plugged it into a small encrypted laptop and played the file. The voices filled the room. Deja's statement, the threat, the rustling, and then a name. Tell Maxwell his time's up. The room went still. Walter sat back. That wasn't just a warning. That was a signature. Chandler's eyes narrowed. You recognize the voice? Walter nodded grimly. Franklin Teague, ex-NSA, works private security now. Maxwell's cleanup man. Eleanor felt a chill slide down her spine. Then we're in deeper than we thought. Walter stood and pulled out a thick manila envelope. You're going to leak this, he said, handing it to Chandler. But not to the press. Not yet. We give it to a retired judge, someone with weight, someone Maxwell can't buy. You're going to meet with Judge Martha Quinn. She's clean, and she hates corruption. What about Deja? Eleanor asked. Walter looked at her, then at the woman on the table. She stays here, hidden. I'll take care of her. But you, both of you, you're not just witnesses anymore. You're the fire at the center of this storm. The next day, Chandler and Eleanor met Judge Quinn in a quiet cafe near Davidson College. She was in her 70s, silver-haired but sharp-eyed, and didn't waste time. Walter briefed me. I listened to the audio on my way here. I believe you, but I need more than belief to take this to the bar. Chandler handed over the manila envelope. Inside were photos, zoning maps, legal documents with forged timestamps, and a list of names council members, investors, police officers linked to Maxwell's slush accounts. Quinn reviewed them in silence, her expression hardening with every page. "I'll call in a few favors," she said. "But be warned, Dance, this hits the circuit. You'll have no protection." Eleanor leaned forward. "We don't need protection. We need the truth." That evening, Chandler stood at the window of Eleanor's home, watching the street. His phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "You should have kept fixing lights." He showed it to Eleanor. She didn't flinch. Then they should have stayed in the dark. As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the house in amber light, they sat side by side on the couch, not speaking, just knowing. They weren't victims. They weren't pawns. They were the beginning of something. And the fire wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. By morning, the rain returned. Soft at first, then heavier, soaking the streets of Charlotte in a film of gray melancholy. Chandler stood in Eleanor's kitchen, staring out the window as the drops streaked down the glass. He hadn't slept. Not really. Every creak in the house felt like a shadow shifting. Every gust of wind made him check the locks again. Across the room, Eleanor sat at the table with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, flipping through the thick envelope Judge Quinn had left behind after their meeting. "We have enough to drown Maxwell," she murmured, not looking up. "But we need to make sure we're standing when the water rises." Chandler finally turned from the window. "I've seen men like him before. They burn the fuse from both ends. Sooner or later, they always explode." The plan was in motion. Judge Quinn had scheduled a closed-door hearing with a federal investigator. That gave Chandler and Eleanor 72 hours to gather any final evidence that might cement the case and to protect the people who had helped them so far. First on the list, Deja. Walter had moved her to a cabin in the Blue Ridge foothills. No address, no paper trail, no phone, just coordinates. Eleanor insisted on going herself. "They won't expect me, and if they're watching your every step, we shouldn't move as a pair." Chandler hesitated, then nodded. "Take the Jeep. It's clean. Don't stop for anything but Gassand. Use cash." He slipped a folded wad of bills into her hand, then held it for a second longer than necessary. "I'll be waiting when you get back." While Eleanor drove north into the mountains, Chandler headed into the Lion's Den. Maxwell Holdings towered above downtown like a concrete fortress, black glass, steel beams, guards in every corner. Chandler didn't go inside. Instead, he parked across the street and watched. A delivery van pulled up to the rear dock. Men in suits filtered in and out of the lobby, talking into Bluetooth earpieces. The world went on like nothing was wrong. But Chandler knew the truth now. Behind every tinted window was a layer of rot. His phone buzzed. "Walter." "Got something," the old man grunted. "One of my guys tracked down an old zoning officer retired. Name's Hank Talbert. Says he was paid to rubber. Stamped several of Maxwell's land purchases. He's scared, but he'll talk. Lives out near Lake Norman. Text me the address," Chandler said. "I'm going now." "Chandler," Walter added, voice low. "Be careful. Hank's got reason to believe someone's been watching him too." Noted. When Chandler arrived, the small house by the lake was quiet, tucked behind a row of pine trees. Hank Talbert opened the door with shaking hands, the barrel of a shotgun just visible behind the screen. "I didn't call the cops," the old man said, "because I know they might be in on it. But I ain't trying to get killed either." Chandler raised both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Chandler Brooks. I just want the truth." Inside, Hank sat at the edge of an old recliner, his hand still resting near the shotgun. "It started in '08, he said. "Maxwell had a mantle, wore sunglasses at night, came to my office with cash in a brown envelope, told me if I approved 3 rezoning requests, I'd never have to worry about a mortgage again. I didn't say no." He looked up, eyes haunted. "But I didn't know he was going to tear down the church or evict that old veteran from his house. I didn't know." Chandler took notes. Photos. A signed affidavit. "Do you remember the man's name?" Hank nodded. "He called himself Teague, but he never gave a first name." Chandler's jaw tensed. Franklin Teague again. He was the ghost in the machine, the enforcer behind the curtain. And now, the final thread tying the whole operation together. As Chandler prepared to leave, Hank grabbed his arm. "They tried to scare me off last week. Slashed my tires. Shot my dog. You think they won't kill me too? Chandler looked him dead in the eyes. If this goes right, they won't get the chance. Meanwhile, Eleanor reached the cabin by sunset. Deja was resting, pale but stronger. Her voice had regained a sliver of its bite. You sure it's safe to be here? She asked. As safe as it gets, Eleanor replied. We need you to record a full deposition. Something formal. Walter's setting up a secure line tonight. You really think this'll end him? Deja asked. Eleanor sat beside her. I don't know if it'll end him, but it might end the silence. And that's where justice begins. Deja smiled faintly. You sound like a lawyer. Just someone who's tired of watching people like Chandler clean up the messes other men make. That night, Chandler returned home with Hank's signed documents and one photo taken in 2011 showing Maxwell, Franklin Teague, and a city councilwoman standing in front of a construction site, all smiles. A plaque in the background read, Future Home of Maxwell Urban Renewal Project. Underneath the surface of that single frame was an entire city of lies. Chandler scanned it, encrypted it, and sent it to Judge Quinn. Then he shut his laptop and stared out at the night. No more whispers, no more shadows. The fire was coming, and this time, it had a name. By midnight, all the pieces were moving. Judge Quinn's legal team had secured a temporary injunction blocking Maxwell from selling any more assets. Walter was coordinating with journalists who had seen the audio and photo evidence. Eleanor was driving back from the cabin with a flash drive hidden beneath her seat. And Chandler, restless, burning, sat with a piece of paper in his hand. A letter he had started writing 3 years ago. To his brother, killed in a housing protest Maxwell's men had cleared with tear gas and riot shields. The letter began, You were right. Silence is violence, and I'm done being quiet. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. The city slept, but justice was finally waking up. The following morning broke with a harsh, amber sun spilling across the rooftops, casting long shadows over Charlotte's downtown towers. Chandler stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of his button-down shirt with practiced precision. He wasn't wearing his usual work clothes today, no tool belt, no dust-stained jeans. Today, he needed to look like someone who belonged in a courtroom, even if he knew damn well he never had. Downstairs, Eleanor was already up, pacing the floor with her phone pressed to her ear. No, Walter, she said, her voice taut with urgency. Tell them to stay parked 2 blocks away. I don't want anyone tipping off the press. This has to feel clean controlled. If we look like we're staging a show, Maxwell's lawyers will chew it apart. She turned to Chandler and offered a breathless nod. The hearing's at 9. Quinn's team will meet us there. He grabbed the flash drive from the table, the one with the affidavits, the photos, the recordings, and tucked it safely into the inside pocket of his blazer. Let's make it count. As they stepped outside, a soft breeze rustled the dogwood trees lining the sidewalk. The neighborhood was quiet, but there was tension in the air, like everyone could feel something shifting beneath their feet. Chandler helped Eleanor into the passenger seat, then took the wheel of the Jeep. They didn't talk much on the way. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered was already written, recorded, or burned into their memories. The courthouse loomed ahead, flanked by 2 stone lions and guarded by men who looked too young to understand the weight of what happened inside. Inside the courtroom, Judge Quinn sat tall and unmoving behind the bench. His face bore the gravity of someone who had lived long enough to see justice fail and still chose to fight for it anyway. We're here to determine the credibility of newly presented evidence, he announced, glancing toward the glass-paneled gallery. This is not a criminal trial. Not yet. But it may very well become one. Maxwell's legal team looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine's leak, tailored, smug. Their lead counsel, a silver-haired man named Donnelly, rose and immediately attacked the case's integrity. Your Honor, what we have here is a collection of anecdotes, half-truths, and smear tactics. This is a personal vendetta dressed up as whistleblowing. Chandler kept his expression neutral, but he could feel his knuckles whitening beneath the table. Eleanor placed a hand gently over his. Let them talk, she whispered. Then we end it. The flash drive was entered into the record. Eleanor narrated each segment as the judge watched the screen. The photo of Maxwell at the construction site, the audio clip of Franklin Teague threatening Deja's job, the notarized statement from Hank Talbert. The anonymous report from a former intern who detailed the shredding of incriminating files. Each piece fit into the next like jagged teeth. Each cut deeper. By the time they reached Deja's deposition, the courtroom had gone still. Her voice echoed through the speakers, trembling but clear. They told me if I said anything, I'd never work in this town again. That's what power means here. It's silence, by force. When the final clip ended, Judge Quinn leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "Do you have anything further to add, Mr. Brooks?" Chandler stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. His voice was steady, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "Your Honor, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm just a man who was fixing a light when I saw a woman breaking under the weight of a system built to erase her. I didn't go looking for this fight. But once I saw it once, I knew I couldn't walk away." He paused, looking directly at Maxwell, who sat stiffly at the defense table, his jaw locked in defiance. "You once told me that some people belong beneath others. That money makes the rules. Well, sir, not today." There was a ripple through the gallery. One of the press photographers lowered her camera, visibly shaken. An elderly black woman in the front row quietly dabbed her eyes with a folded handkerchief. Quinn cleared his throat. "This court will recess until this afternoon. I will review the evidence and determine if a federal referral is warranted." He stood, and the gavel came down with a low, decisive thud. Outside the courthouse, the media had arrived in full force. Microphones, cameras, flashes, everything Chandler hated. But Eleanor stepped forward, calm and collected. "We have no formal comment at this time," she said, shielding Chandler with her arm. "Today wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and the truth has finally found its voice." They drove in silence again. Chandler gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "You think it's enough?" he asked, eyes fixed on the road. Eleanor hesitated. "It's a start. But you and I both know men like Maxwell don't crumble overnight. They crack, and we have to keep pressing until the whole damn structure falls." Back at the house, Walter was waiting. He handed them both envelope copies of a second set of documents he'd stashed with a lawyer in Atlanta. "If something happens to either of you," he said bluntly, "these go public. I've got backups of the backups. We're not playing small ball anymore." Chandler reached for his, but Walter pulled it back. "And son, don't forget, Maxwell didn't get this powerful alone. Look for the one still hiding in the dark. He's just the front man." That night, Eleanor cooked. Something simple: grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread from a box. Chandler ate in silence until he couldn't anymore. "You know what keeps me up?" he finally said. "It's not that we could lose. It's that even if we win, there's 100 more like him out there." Eleanor nodded, her gaze steady. "That's why we don't stop at one." The wind picked up outside. A storm was rolling in again, thick and loud, shaking the windows with thunder. But inside that small kitchen, two people sat across from each other, battle-weary but upright. In a world where silence had ruled for too long, they had chosen to speak, and tomorrow, they would fight again. The next morning came with rain that didn't let up. It wasn't dramatic, just persistent, a steady tap against the windows that made the world feel heavier, like even the sky needed to grieve something. Chandler stood on the back porch, arms crossed, watching the drops roll off the edge of the roof. He didn't smoke, but his posture had that same brooding stillness of a man who used to. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. "You didn't sleep," Eleanor said gently, stepping into the doorway. She wore one of his flannel shirts over her nightdress, her hair still tousled from bed. She didn't press him for a response. She just leaned her shoulder against the frame, the way she always did when she was trying not to make him feel cornered. "I kept thinking about Talbert," Chandler finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "He risked everything to come forward, and yet when we walked out of that courtroom yesterday, it felt like the fight just got bigger." He looked over his shoulder at her. "Does that make sense?" Eleanor stepped out into the rain with him, barefoot on the wet wood. "It does," she said, "because now we're not just fighting a man. We're fighting the machine he's built, years of connections, blackmail, favors." Her hand brushed his arm. "But we're not alone." At 10 a.m., Chandler met with Isaiah, the young man who used to work on Maxwell's site as a low-level safety inspector. They sat across from each other at a corner booth in a sleepy diner on the edge of Charlotte, sipping burnt coffee and speaking in low tones. Isaiah looked nervous, his fingers drumming the edge of the sugar packet. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," he said. "They already came to my mother's house. Asked her if she knew where I was. She's 65, lives alone." Chandler didn't interrupt. He let the young man's fear breathe. Then he said, "You're not weak, Isaiah. You're just not used to being heard. And that's by design." He slid a folded slip of paper across the table of contact for a nonprofit lawyer who protected whistleblowers. "You don't have to be the loudest voice. You just have to speak when it matters. We'll amplify the rest." Isaiah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll do it, but I want you to promise me something." Chandler raised an eyebrow. "If I disappear, you don't stop." "I won't," Chandler said, and he meant it. Meanwhile, Eleanor met with Reverend Hargrove, an old family friend who still ran a modest but well-loved black church downtown. She handed him a flash drive, and as he slipped it into his coat pocket, she saw the flicker of hesitation cross his eyes. "Ellie," he said, using the name only people from her childhood still did. This could stir something real dangerous." "I know," she said quietly, "but silence is already doing that. This community deserves to know who's been controlling their futures from behind the curtain." The Reverend nodded slowly. "Then I'll do my part. But you'd best be ready for backlash. The old money in this town doesn't like being told it's not God." That evening, Chandler and Eleanor regrouped in the tiny living room, walls lined with printed articles, timelines, and witness statements. It looked more like a war room than a home. Walter arrived a little after 6, wearing his trademark trench coat and chewing gum like a detective out of a noir movie. He tossed a manila envelope onto the table. "2 more names," he said. "Maxwell wasn't pulling all the strings. There's a councilman and a city planner involved. Both used shell companies to funnel money through contracts. You were right to keep digging." Eleanor opened the folder and studied the names. Her stomach turned. "I knew about the planner, but the councilman, that's worse than I thought. He sits on the ethics committee." Walter gave a humorless chuckle. "Ain't that always the way?" Chandler stepped away from the wall of evidence, rubbing his temples. "We need a bigger play," he muttered. "Something public, loud, something they can't kill with a smear campaign." "I may have just the thing," Walter said. "There's a city budget hearing on Thursday, live streamed, public record. We can submit these findings into the hearing if they relate to misuse of funds. That'll get us on the record." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "And if we present it with enough backing, they can't pretend it's just a disgruntled employee, especially if the community shows up." Walter leaned forward. "You get those church leaders, union reps, teachers, you pack that room with the real people who were affected, and you make sure the cameras are pointed in the right direction." The next 2 days were a blur of calls, meetings, silent prayers. Chandler reached out to local veterans groups, people he'd helped with odd jobs, people who knew what it meant to stand up when no one else would. Eleanor connected with Deja, who, despite her anxiety, agreed to write a public statement and read it herself if necessary. On the eve of the hearing, Chandler sat alone on the back porch again, rain finally easing into a thick mist. The porch light above him flickered, faintly echoing how it all began. A broken light, a quiet woman, a question that was never really about looks. He could still hear her voice that day. Not the words, but the way she said them, like she saw something in him that he didn't yet believe. Eleanor joined him, her presence soft and familiar. "You scared?" she asked. He looked up. "No," he said. "I'm just awake, finally." She sat beside him, pulled a blanket around their shoulders. "Then let's not waste it." In the distance, the city lights pulsed like a heart trying to keep beating in spite of everything. Tomorrow would come, and when it did, they would step into it not as victims of the machine but as the people who dared to call it by its name. Thursday arrived cloaked in a tension that no amount of rain could wash away. By 8:30 a.m., Eleanor and Chandler stood at the entrance of the Charlotte Municipal Hall, a tall building of aging stone and polished brass, its steps already crowded with a quiet stream of locals filtering inside. Chandler wore his best shirt, sleeves rolled just once to his forearms. Eleanor beside him, dressed simply in a dark green blouse and slacks, hair pulled into a neat twist. They didn't look like revolutionaries, but that was the point. Sometimes, the most powerful storms came dressed in calm. Inside, the budget hearing room filled faster than expected. Rows of folding chairs held teachers, Small business owners, veterans, single mothers with children on their laps. Chandler recognized faces. Isaiah sat near the front, nervously thumbing a yellow notepad. Reverend Hargrove stood behind him, hands folded tightly in front. Deja came in moments later, escorted by her cousin, eyes wide but defiant. Even Walter looked mildly impressed, muttering under his breath, "Hell of a turnout." At the front, Councilman Ridley, a silver-haired man with a practiced smile, adjusted his mic and tapped twice. "We'll begin today's public hearing regarding municipal budget allocation, including discretionary spending, infrastructure contracts, and education fund use. Citizens will have 2 minutes each to speak." The usual shuffle began. A teacher spoke about outdated textbooks. A small cafe owner criticized increased street vendor fees. Then Eleanor stood. The room quieted almost instinctively. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My name is Eleanor Hart," she said, "and I have documentation here proving that $2.3 million allocated for infrastructure safety upgrades was rerouted through a shell company tied to Councilman Ridley and city planner Thomas Cross. That money never repaired a single school crosswalk. It lined pockets, and I'm here to put that on the record." Murmurs swelled behind her. Councilman Ridley cleared his throat, half rising. "Miss Hart, these are serious accusations." "They're not accusations," Chandler interrupted, rising now himself. "They're facts. We've submitted verified bank statements, dated transfers, and eyewitness accounts, including one from a former employee who saw the bribes being passed in brown envelopes." Walter, seated in the back, nodded and passed a sealed envelope to the council clerk. Ridley flushed. "This is irregular." "No," Eleanor said calmly but firmly. "What's irregular is how long people in this town have kept quiet out of fear. But that ends today." The clerk flipped through the documents. "Councilman, the documents appear to be properly notarized and match entries in our expense tracking database." Ridley looked as if someone had knocked the wind out of him. For the first time, he didn't know which script to follow. From the side aisle, Reverend Hargrove stood. "This isn't just about money," he said, voice filling the room. "This is about justice. It's about children nearly hit by speeding cars because there's no working signal. It's about veterans denied access ramps at community centers. It's about a system that's been bleeding us dry while we're told to be grateful for what little's left." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then rising into a rhythm that echoed something deeper than politics. It was the sound of people remembering they had a voice. Isaiah approached the mic next. He looked like he might tremble, but instead, he took a deep breath and said, "I used to work for Maxwell Construction. I saw the codes being altered. I watched safety checks get bypassed, so deadlines could be met early, and bonuses cashed. I reported it, and a week later, I was let go. No cause, no warning. But I kept a copy of those inspection reports." Chandler stepped forward again. "We're not asking you to believe us. We're asking you to investigate, publicly, transparently. Let the truth rise or fall on its own." Ridley's voice returned, thinner now. This hearing is not the proper venue for legal proceedings." "No," Eleanor said, eyes sharp, "but it's the place where the people finally get to hear what you've buried." By the end of the morning, 3 additional citizens had submitted statements, all supporting what Chandler and Eleanor had revealed. The council, visibly shaken, voted to open an emergency ethics review and suspend Ridley and Cross pending investigation. It wasn't a conviction, but it was a beginning. Outside the hall, the rain had finally stopped. People lingered on the steps, talking to one another in new tonestones of ownership, of solidarity. Chandler and Eleanor stood quietly off to the side, soaking it all in. Deja approached them, cheeks flushed. "I didn't speak," she said. "I froze, but I watched. And I'm going to write about this, all of it, for the school paper." "You spoke louder than you think," Eleanor said gently. Walter handed Chandler a folded paper. "Councilman Ridley's office has already issued a no comment. You made the front page, above the fold." He looked up, something rare flickering in his usually cynical eyes. "Good work, soldier." Chandler exhaled. "We're not done." "No," Walter said, cracking a half smile. "But you just kicked down the front door." That night, back home, Eleanor curled beside Chandler on the worn sofa. The wall of notes was still up, but tonight, they looked different. Less like battles to come, More like victories remembered. "Did you think we'd get here?" she whispered. "No," he said honestly. "But I hoped." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Then let's keep hoping. And keep fighting." From the radio in the kitchen, a soft jazz tune began to play warm, crackling slightly at the edges. And in the quiet of the room, surrounded by pages of truth and proof of courage, they let the music wash over them like the first light of something real. The following week, Chandler sat alone in the garage, the air thick with the scent of engine grease and cooling metal. The door was open, allowing a breeze to slip in from the alley. A customer's old Chevy sat jacked up, its undercarriage half fixed. He had started the repair that morning, but his hands had stopped moving hours ago. He couldn't seem to focus. The newspaper clippings had come out. Every major station in Charlotte had picked up the story. They didn't mention his name directly, but he recognized the shape of his actions in the words. Local whistleblower. Anonymous veteran source. Community justice effort. There was pride in that. But there was something else, too. Something heavier. He had turned his phone off for most of the day. Too many messages, too many voices. Some were grateful, others were not, and a few were threatening. Behind him, Eleanor's voice came softly. "You haven't eaten." He didn't turn. Not hungry. She stepped closer, then knelt beside the car with him. "You fixed the truth, Chandler. But I know it doesn't feel that simple." He let out a quiet laugh, bitter around the edges. "You ever notice how telling the truth makes you feel more alone than lying ever did?" Eleanor didn't speak for a moment. Then she reached for his hand. "Maybe. But telling the truth also means you're finally standing where the light can find you." He glanced over. Her eyes didn't waver. "I'm scared for you," she said softly. "There's power in what we did. But there's backlash, too. People who built their lives on silence don't go quiet without a fight." Just then, the sound of gravel crunching outside drew both their eyes to the doorway. A black SUV pulled up slowly, its windows tinted. Chandler stood instinctively, shielding Eleanor with his body. The passenger window rolled down. A man in a dark blazer leaned out. "Chandler Brooks?" Chandler's fists clenched. "Who's asking?" The man reached into his pocket slowly and held up a badge. "Detective Mark Rutledge, Charlotte Internal Affairs. We're not here to cause trouble, just here to talk." Chandler hesitated. Eleanor stepped forward. "You can talk here." Rutledge gave her a measured look, then nodded. "We've been reviewing the files submitted to the council. Some things don't add up. Not your part, yours is solid. But the deeper we dig, the more threads we're pulling." Chandler's voice was steady. And we think Councilman Ridley's just the beginning. Cross was laundering through more than one shell company, possibly even state grant money for veteran services." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You're telling us this, why?" Rutledge looked between them. "Because you've become the face of this, whether you like it or not. And if you're willing, we'd like your help going deeper. Off the record. You know the terrain. You know who talks. We don't." Chandler stared at him. "You want me to become your informant?" "Call it a guide," Rutledge replied. "You've already made enemies. This won't change that, but it might make them count for something." He handed Chandler a card and drove off. The silence afterward was heavier than the engine noise. Later that night, Chandler stood outside the house, staring out at the moonlit street. Eleanor came out with 2 mugs of coffee. He took one without a word. "I know that look," she said gently. "Yeah? You're already in." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think it would stretch this far. I thought it would just be one lie exposed, one man gone, and we'd breathe easier. Systems don't break that cleanly." He glanced at her. "If I do this, if I help them, I need to know you're okay with it. Because it's not just me anymore." She reached up, brushing her thumb across a grease smudge on his cheek. "It was never just you, and I knew the cost the moment I handed you that first document." He looked at her, then really looked. The woman who had walked into his life with a broken light fixture and a stubborn spark. The woman who could have walked away, but stayed. They stood in silence until she whispered, "You don't have to carry it alone." I'm not afraid of the weight," he replied. "I'm afraid of what it will make me become." She stepped closer. "Then let me remind you who you are when you start to forget." Inside, the jazz from the old kitchen radio had been replaced with a news segment, replaying the council vote. Chandler listened as the anchor described a new ethics panel being assembled, public trials being considered. "You ever wonder, Eleanor murmured. If change actually sticks. Chandler thought for a moment. Not always, but sometimes it scares the right people enough to run. A sudden loud knock on the front door startled them both. Chandler moved quickly, shielding Eleanor again as he approached. But when he opened the door, it wasn't another detective or an enemy. It was Isaiah. He looked nervous, clutching a folder in his hands. I found something else, he said. Something big. Eleanor stepped forward. Come in. Isaiah hesitated. You sure? I didn't want to show this to the police until I ran it by you first. Chandler nodded. If it's truth, it belongs here first. Isaiah stepped inside, placing the folder gently on the kitchen table. These are photos, scans of old files. Cross's name isn't just in local documents. There are links to a housing project scam in Raleigh. It goes back 10 years. He was never alone. Chandler opened the folder, slowly turning the pages. Names, numbers, signatures, and one photo check being passed across a table, time-stamped. I think this is deeper than any of us guessed, Isaiah said. Eleanor looked at Chandler. Then it's not over. No, Chandler said quietly. It's just beginning. Outside, the night deepened. But in their kitchen, the lights stayed on long after midnight, not for fear, but because sometimes truth needs light to grow, and they weren't done planting. Not yet. The next morning brought a kind of quiet that didn't sit well with Chandler. It was too still, like the breath held right before a storm. Eleanor was already at the community center, prepping for her weekly class. She'd kissed his cheek and said, "Try not to dig yourself into more trouble before lunch." But even her voice had carried the weight of unease. Chandler stood alone in the garage, eyes on the folder Isaiah had brought the night before. The names, the signatures, the timestamps, they weren't just pieces of evidence anymore. They were threads pulling loose an entire fabric of deceit that stretched across counties and decades. By noon, Chandler was in his truck, driving up Interstate 85 toward Raleigh. The photograph of the check exchange had an address scribbled on the back of a derelict building in an old industrial part of town. When he arrived, the place looked abandoned. Peeling paint, rusted signage, broken windows like tired eyes. But something about it felt watched. He parked a block away and walked the rest. The front door was padlocked, but the side entrance had been forced open before. Inside, the place reeked of mold and rat droppings. Still, buried beneath the rot, Chandler spotted them rows of filing cabinets. Most had been emptied long ago, but 2 drawers near the back remained untouched. He pulled one open. Inside were records dated back to 2012 leases, property transfer documents, checks. And there it was, again, Councilman Cross's name, tucked under an alias. Not just one alias, but 3. And in the margins, handwritten notes, the same slanted penmanship as the one from the envelope Eleanor had first handed him. This wasn't just political, it was personal. Cross had been doing this a long time, and someone had been keeping receipts. He snapped photos with his phone and shoved what he could into a canvas bag. As he turned to leave, a soft noise echoed through the building. A boot scuff. Someone else was here. Chandler froze. Then, slowly, he moved toward the shadows, crouching behind a pillar. The front door creaked. Heavy footsteps entered. He could make out 2 voices, male, older, southern drawl. "You sure this is where it was?" one said. "Positive. The intern said he saw headlights out here late last night." The other spat. "Stupid move. We should have burned this place down years ago." Chandler's breath stayed shallow. He reached into his jacket, gripping the small folding knife he always kept. He didn't want to fight, but he wasn't leaving empty-handed. The men split up, their footsteps crunching over broken glass. One passed within feet of Chandler, muttering curses. When both had moved deeper into the back, Chandler slipped out the side door, sprinted to his truck, and peeled out. He didn't stop until he was back in Charlotte. Isaiah was waiting in the garage, pacing. "You're crazy," he blurted the moment Chandler stepped out. "That building due. You know how many people died in that project? Now we know who profited off it," Chandler said, holding up the bag. "And they know we know." Isaiah swallowed hard. "So what now?" Chandler looked toward the house, where Eleanor had just pulled in, her car door swinging shut. She stepped out, immediately catching his eye. "We go louder," Chandler said. "We stop waiting for justice to find its way through paperwork." Later that evening, The garage transformed. Eleanor brewed coffee for a rotating door of guests, veterans, former city employees, even a couple of old journalists. Chandler spread out the documents on a long table, using yellow sticky notes to mark connections. Names began forming a web. Cross, Ridley, a former sheriff, a retired judge, and a non-profit board tied to state housing grants. "What's the plan?" Eleanor asked after everyone had gone quiet. Chandler looked around. "We hold a meeting. Public, at the community center." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "You mean like a town hall?" "No," Chandler said. "Like a reckoning." Word traveled fast. In just 2 days, Eleanor's community center was full. Folding chairs packed every square inch. A local pastor opened with a prayer. Then Chandler stood, holding nothing but a manila folder and a scar on his left hand that ached when the weather turned. "My name is Chandler Brooks," he said, his voice steady. "Some of you know me as a mechanic. Some of you knew my father, who died waiting for a housing voucher that never came. Some of you watched your neighborhoods rot while men in suits told you to be patient." He paused, scanning the room. "I'm not asking for patience. I'm asking for light." He opened the folder, revealing copies of the documents. "This is where your taxes went. This is why your block flooded every spring. This is who paid themselves while you buried your parents in silence." Murmurs swept the room. One woman, elderly and wrapped in a green shawl, stood and whispered, "That's my son's name. He died on that project site." Chandler's voice cracked but held. "Tonight isn't about blame. It's about reclaiming truth and deciding what we'll do with it." Isaiah stepped forward then, lifting a photo of the check exchange. "This man gave us the tools, but it's us who have to build something better." Applause grew, slow and uncertain at first, but then stronger and louder. Chandler felt it not in his ears but in his chest. The people were awake, and for once, they weren't alone. Afterward, Eleanor found him standing in the dark hallway behind the stage. She touched his hand. "You did it." "No," he said. "We started it." She leaned in, voice low. "Do you feel it too? Like something sacred is shifting?" Chandler nodded. "Like ashes finally blowing off the embers." She smiled. "Then let's keep the fire going." And with that, they stepped back into the light, where truth waited for no one but welcomed everyone brave enough to speak. The following morning brought with it a strange kind of hush. Not silence exactly, no. The world outside still turned. Birds chirped, trucks rumbled along the road, and Eleanor's kettle still whistled at 7:30 sharp. But within the Brooks house, there was a stillness that ran deeper. Chandler sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of black coffee gone cold, his fingers tapping lightly against the rim. Across from him, Eleanor flipped through a local paper. Page 3, there it was. Mechanic exposes local corruption at community hall. City council responds with silence. It wasn't front page. It wasn't bold. But it was there, and that meant something. Eleanor set the paper down. They buried it, but they didn't kill it. Chandler looked up. Number. And the silence is louder than denial. Just then, Isaiah pushed through the back door, jacket halfway zipped and eyes lit with urgency. "You need to see this," he said, waving his phone. "Councilman Cross just posted a statement. He's calling the documents fabricated, says you doctored them for personal gain." Eleanor stood, fury sparking in her voice. "That man is trying to gaslight an entire community." Chandler didn't flinch. "Let him. We're not done yet." The plan had never been just to show the evidence, it was to make it impossible to ignore. So Chandler, Eleanor, and Isaiah had lined up interviews. Not with cable giants, they didn't trust those. But with podcasts, local radio, small YouTube voices that still valued integrity over spectacle. By noon, they were sitting in a converted living room studio in the West End, across from a woman named Tanya Hill, host of Carolina Truthcast. Her wrinkles framed eyes that had seen too many lies over too many years. But today, they held hope. "Ready when you are," she said, adjusting her mic. Chandler leaned forward. "We're not doing this for clicks. We're doing this because no one else would." Tanya nodded. "Tell them then. All of it." For nearly an hour, Chandler spoke not as a victim, not even as a whistleblower, but as a man who had simply stopped waiting for someone else to fix what was broken. Eleanor shared her perspective: tooth cultural erasure, the decades of subtle injustice that people had learned to swallow. Isaiah brought the receipts, the paper trails, the names, the maps, no flash, just fact. By that evening, the episode had gone viral in local circles. People were sharing clips, quoting Eleanor's line, "We were not asking for charity, we were demanding our dignity." But with light always came shadow. The threat started small: an anonymous voicemail here, a broken window at the garage there. But then came the envelope, slid beneath Chandler's front door late that night. Inside, a photo of him and Eleanor standing on her porch, circled in red marker. No words, just a second slip of paper with 3 numbers, 72, 114, 207. Eleanor found it first. Her hands trembled, but she didn't drop it. She brought it straight to Chandler, who stood barefoot in the living room, jaw tight. "It's a message," she said. "Coordinates, maybe?" He shook his head slowly. "Number. That's our case file number. From back when my dad died waiting for housing." Isaiah arrived within minutes. "So they're watching, and they want us to know it." Chandler nodded, "Which means we're getting close." The trio took it straight to Sergeant Marla Jennings, the same woman who once thought Chandler was wasting her time. But now she leaned over the photo with narrowed eyes, her badge still pinned to a wrinkled flannel shirt. "Off duty, but very much on alert." "I've seen this before," she said. "Not in this case, but in the old ones. When someone gets too close to naming names, this isn't just Cross anymore. He's part of a bigger structure." Eleanor leaned in. "How much bigger?" Marla met her gaze. "You ever heard of the Blackbird Network?" Isaiah blinked. "Sounds like a spy movie." "It's not," Marla said grimly. "It's what we called a group of private contractors, ex-law enforcement, and former military who got tied up in state-sponsored cleanups back in the 90s and early 2000s. Land acquisitions, political threats, disappearances, quiet work, off the books." Chandler exhaled slowly. "You're telling me this is more than just a greedy councilman?" Marla nodded. "I'm telling you Cross might just be the face, not the fist." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Eleanor spoke. "So we fight smarter." The next day, Chandler gave the biggest interview yet live, face forward, to a national podcast audience. He didn't name every name, but he left enough threads dangling for the public to pull. He ended with a single line that Tanya clipped and posted everywhere. "When silence becomes compliance, speaking up is the only form of survival." That night, their street was quieter than usual. A neighborhood watch car passed every 20 minutes. Sergeant Jennings parked her cruiser near the end of the block, and Chandler sat on the porch beside Eleanor, a bat across his lap, not out of fear, but as a statement. "You think they'll try something?" she asked, voice low. "I think they already did," he replied. "But the difference now? We're not alone. Not anymore." She reached for his hand. "It feels like something's coming." He nodded, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "Let it come. This time, we'll be ready." The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere, a dog barked in the distance. And the house, this quiet house that once held grief, now pulsed with a new kind of energy. The kind that rises before the truth finally burns through. The morning after Chandler's interview aired nationwide, the quiet of the neighborhood was broken not by birdsong or passing cars, but by the distinct low thump of helicopters circling overhead. The residents of Cedar Hill came out of their homes slowly, shielding their eyes from the glare of the rising sun. 2 unmarked black helicopters loitered above, hovering like vultures over still prey. Chandler stood at the curb in front of Eleanor's house, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the sky. Isaiah pulled up moments later, still in his mechanic's coveralls. "They're not press," he said grimly. "They're not even pretending." Chandler nodded. "That's a message." "We got theirs," Eleanor said, joining them, her voice sharper than usual. "Now it's time they get ours." By noon, the community center was packed wall to wall. The smell of old varnish, sweat, and baked goods mixed in the air, a strangely comforting blend of familiarity and unrest. There were no politicians on the podium, no security detail in suits, just folding chairs, a couple of handheld mics, and truth in its rawest form. Isaiah stepped up first, speaking not just as a witness to corruption but as a son of the community. "This isn't about one man or one council. This is about how silence became a policy, and injustice a habit." His words landed hard. A few murmurs rose, and heads nodded. Chandler took the mic next. His voice was calm, but carried an edge honed by years of biting his tongue. They think because we don't wear ties or have law degrees, we won't notice. But we noticed. And we remember. He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the crowd. My father died waiting on a housing list that was never real. My neighbors paid into a system that quietly erased them. That ends now not because we asked nicely, but because we stopped asking. Eleanor came up last. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Dressed in a long charcoal coat and boots worn soft by years, she didn't need a speech. She stood, silent, for several seconds before lifting her hand and pointing to the crowd. "Raise your hand," she said, "if you've ever been ignored." A sea of hands. If you've ever been talked over, passed over, or treated like you're invisible. More hands. Then you already know what we're fighting. And you already know how to win. As people clapped and murmured, someone in the back raised a hand, voice cracking slightly. "What happens next?" Eleanor turned to Chandler. He took a deep breath. "Next, we press charges. We submit the evidence officially. No back channels. Everything public." "They won't play fair," someone else called. "Neither will we," Chandler replied. "But we'll play true. There's a difference." After the meeting, Marla Jennings pulled Chandler aside. Her face was pale, her badge slightly askew. "I intercepted chatter this morning," she whispered. "Blackbird's sending someone in. Not a team, just one. They call him Lowell. Former intelligence, off-grid since 2011. He doesn't talk. He ends things." Chandler blinked. "You're saying this guy's an assassin?" "Not exactly," she said. "He's a fixer. He doesn't kill the body, he kills the story." Chandler exhaled slowly. "So we don't let the story die." That evening, a press truck from WNC News showed up uninvited. A young white reporter named Danielle West got out, holding a mic with shaking fingers but fire in her eyes. "I want to help," she said. "My producer says this is too messy to touch, but I've seen this before. My father lost his pension the same way." Eleanor nodded. "Then you understand." They let her in. Over dinner, fried catfish, cornbread, and slaw, served in Eleanor's kitchen, Danielle filmed her segment. It wasn't flashy, no dramatic music, no ominous edits, just facts, names, paperwork, faces, stories. By 11 p.m., it aired. A primetime piece framed in honesty, not spectacle. Within an hour, phones began ringing. Former employees, retired clerks, even an ex-developer from Atlanta called in. They all had one thing in common, pieces of the same hidden puzzle. Isaiah created a secure folder, uploading each document, labeling each voice memo. "They're burning their own trail," he said, "but we're tracking the smoke." Then came the real surprise. At 2 a.m., a knock at Chandler's door. He opened it cautiously, bat still within reach. Standing on the porch was a woman in her 60s, neatly dressed in a long navy coat, with silver hair pulled tight. She introduced herself as Margaret Renner. "I was Cross's assistant," she said, voice trembling. "He thinks I'm loyal, but I was never blind." Chandler motioned her in. "Why now?" "Because he crossed a line. He's not just covering corruption, he's trying to erase people. I won't be part of that." She handed him a flash drive. "This has names, bank wires, real estate transfers under false LLCs. But more than that, it has audio, private meetings, threats." Eleanor leaned forward. "You sure you're safe?" Margaret shook her head. "I'm sure I'm not, but doing nothing is worse." Chandler looked at Isaiah. "Back it all up, twice." By sunrise, Isaiah had encrypted everything and sent one copy to a journalist friend in D.C. The other went to a civil rights lawyer Eleanor trusted in Asheville. "We're out of the shadows now," Chandler said quietly, looking at the flash drive like it was both a torch and a target. "Which means the next hit won't be quiet." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we hit back. Not with fists, with truth, with proof, with people." As the town woke to fog and frost, it also woke to a quiet revolution in motion. Flyers had gone up overnight, simple, black and white papers with 3 words bolded in block print. "We remember everything." Below that, a list of names, victims, stories, witnesses. The streets buzzed not with fear, but with purpose. Someone had drawn a line, and for the first time in years, the people of Cedar Hill had chosen to step over it together. The morning came pale and slow, spilling weak sunlight through the fog like it was trying to apologize for all the nights before. Chandler stood on the back porch of Eleanor's house, wrapped in an old army blanket Isaiah had found in his truck. He hadn't slept. None of them had. Not after Margaret Renner's revelations. Not after uploading everything. Not after watching that final silent hour of the night tick away, wondering if it would end with sirens or just silence. But it didn't end. It began. Eleanor joined him, steaming coffee in hand, hair tied back in a loose bun, dressed in jeans and an oversized flannel. No makeup, no performance, just her quietly fierce. "We've gone too far to stop now," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "We've crossed the threshold. You feel it, don't you?" Chandler nodded, sipping the bitter warmth. "They're going to push back hard. Then we don't bend." The knock came at 8:03 a.m., soft, almost polite. Isaiah opened the door cautiously, hand resting on his concealed weapon. But it wasn't Lowell. It was Deputy Myers, unarmed, alone. He removed his hat as he stepped inside. "I watched the broadcast," he said, "twice, and I think I've been on the wrong side of this town too long." Silence met him. Not cold, just cautious. He held up a folder. "I kept copies, payroll logs, time cards, proof that certain names kept collecting checks long after they'd stopped showing up." Chandler stared at the folder, then back at Myers. "Why now?" Myers exhaled. "Because when your kid asks why people are protesting outside your house, you realize you're not just a man in uniform. You're a story they're going to retell." They took the folder, and with that, the final puzzle piece slid into place. By midday, the courthouse was flooded not by protesters this time, but by citizens armed with paper, declarations, affidavits, witness statements, and then the flash drive. The whole town watched as Eleanor, Chandler, Isaiah, and even Margaret Renner entered the clerk's office together. No cameras, no theatrics, just a line drawn in ink and courage. The clerk, a graying woman with watery eyes, took the stack without a word and stamped it with a heavy hand. "May the law finally do what it's supposed to do," she whispered. Outside, Danielle West reported live as the crowd grew, not shouting, not chanting, just standing, as if presence itself could be protest. "This isn't just about a scandal," Danielle said into her mic. "It's about a town refusing to forget. It's about names that mattered even when no one listened." By 4 p.m., warrants were issued, 12 in total. Councilmen, developers, 2 former mayors, even Cross's name made the list. But he was gone, disappeared, his office ransacked, his house cleared. "He'll surface," Margaret said grimly. "They always do, just long enough to think they've won again." At sundown, Eleanor drove Chandler to the field where her mother used to bring her as a girl. Wild grass danced in the golden wind, and the air smelled like earth and hope. They sat on the hood of her old Buick, watching the town from a distance. "I don't think they'll ever apologize," Chandler said. "No one ever does." Eleanor glanced at him. "But they'll remember. That's better." She reached into her coat and handed him something small. A pin. Just a simple brass circle with the word truth engraved across the center. "My mother wore it when she taught. When they tried to fire her for teaching Black history, she pinned it to her collar and said, 'The truth is what survives the fire.'" Chandler held it like it was heavy. "Thank you." "No," she said. "Thank you, Chandler Brooks, for fixing more than just my garage light." That night, there was no grand celebration, no parade, just small moments of quiet victory. Mrs. Darnell, who had once been evicted without warning, had her case reopened. Isaiah's father's name was cleared in a ledger once buried under false audits. The town library received a flood of donations with anonymous notes, in memory of those who never got a chance, and Margaretance invisible in a room full of lies was now asked to speak at the State Ethics Board next month. But perhaps the greatest change happened on a porch at 9:17 p.m. Eleanor sat curled in a blanket, Chandler beside her, as her head leaned against his shoulder. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence was no longer about shame. It was a peace earned. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't really believe in turning points before you showed up. And now, Now I believe in timing, and in good men who refuse to stay quiet." Chandler smiled, eyes closed. "Guess it's true what they say. Sometimes, when you fix a light, you end up fixing the whole damn house." Ugh. And beneath the stars of Cedar Hill, that broken town began to heal, not because the system corrected itself, but because good people stopped waiting for permission to do what was right.